Asia is scorching and soaking at the same time. One day you have 42 degrees Celsius in heat, and another one unprecedented floods. These two are connected, and it doesn't need to be very academic, but rather something practical, because understanding this and how societies, Asia in particular, can adapt will be critical not only in the coming days, but in the coming decades. Please pay attention to this because climate change is here. Extreme weather events will keep happening more intensely and more frequently than ever before, and you need to be prepared because if not, the damages might be irreversible, not only for your region, but even for yourself. And let's start first with what's happening, right? In Japan, there have been unprecedented temperatures, including almost hitting 42 degrees in Japan, whereas in Korea, in South Korea, 22 consecutive days have been considered as tropical nights, something that clearly marks an even higher bar of what was already happening in the region. But then you go west and you find other extreme weather events, consequences including extreme floods, unprecedented one, that have been happening in China, in Pakistan, in India, that obviously there have been some damages in the infrastructure, but most importantly, people have died. And we're not talking about one or two people, no, no. We're talking about dozens and dozens every day that these catastrophes have happened. And this is a common denominator, both for the western part or Asia and the eastern part or in central one, which basically is climate change. Asia is one of the fastest regions that are becoming much warmer than the average. In this case, almost twice as much. And this is certainly very worrisome as there are millions, if not billions, of people that live there. And the region clearly needs to adapt. This is happening both because the ocean is warming, and this has very negative effects, including having more moisture in the atmosphere, which translates into heavier and more frequent and unprecedented storms, as there's more moisture in the atmosphere. Whereas also the glaciers may be melting at a higher rate, and when the glaciers melt, sea level and including the rivers, that level rises. And when that level rises, even if it's a couple centimeters in comparison to years, decades, and centuries previously, this means that when there's a once in a century event, as the sea level and the river level was higher, the catastrophe will be happening not once every 100 years, but once every 10 years. And so, this is only to put into practice does not necessarily mean that in that concrete example that will happen, but there is the rationale behind of glaciers melting, because that doesn't affect only in the sea level rise, but also rivers and consequently floods. And this also happens with extreme temperatures. This might be the most direct effect of climate change. As global temperatures increase, also do heat waves, both in the ocean and in the continent. So that's clearly a problem. And we're not talking only about the devastation of families, but also in terms of GDP per capita and in the trillions. It has been estimated by the World Economic Forum, and you can check the sources below, that the economic impact in Asia has been 2 trillion in the last decades, which is quite unprecedented, and China has absorbed the most part of this economic damage. And obviously this can be recovered, but schools, trains, infrastructure, energy infrastructure, for example, and lives cannot be recovered as easily as the economic term, right? So that's why the region needs to adapt, as it is very vulnerable to the damages of climate change, partially also because most countries are not fully developed as other countries in Western Europe, for example, or in the US. So that's an additional reason why the region needs to adapt at a faster rate than other regions. And this sounds like very negative and like an impossible mission, but it is not. And we're very optimistic about it because, from the side of the mitigation perspective, which means reducing CO2 related emissions, a critical component of mitigating and solving this extremely complicated issue called climate change, we need to reduce CO2 emissions. And China, for example, has done a tremendous job in fostering the green transition, especially with solar energy, with PVs. And the cost has clearly been decreasing in the last decades, and now it's even below the cost of producing energy with fossil fuels, which does not mean that the overall cost will be better if you only had renewable energy, because you have to take a look at the whole energy mix. But still, at producing, it's now cheaper in the whole world, really, and especially in China. And this is thanks to an innovation and a clear bet of the Chinese government in that regard. And that's a sign of optimism. But that's rather from the perspective of the mitigation, so reducing CO2 related emissions. Also, obviously, adapting to a more autonomous and independent energy grid, which might also provide a higher independence, for example, when it comes to turning on the AC. But that's not that much when it comes to adaptation. And here is where Asia has the biggest opportunity, and also, I would say, a window of opportunity that is closing. As climate change rapidly evolves, the current infrastructure of Asia, and really all parts of the world, was not built considering a warmer climate, and therefore a much more dense, intense, unprecedented, more frequent weather events that are too extreme to adapt. That's why Asia, in this case, needs to clearly adapt as soon as possible. And if it can mitigate the worst effects of climate change, then that would be even better. But adaptation is a first measure that Asia needs to consider, as we're seeing that the population and the infrastructure cannot bear this anymore. And this is the amoeba, the beginning of the climate change era. Because even though we've been polluting the atmosphere in the last 180 years since the Industrial Revolution began, the worst effects of climate change are yet to come. And this is not because we want to be extremely pessimistic and catastrophic about the world. It's really because of how it works. It is physics and chemics, in chemistry, sorry. And that's why, if we want to decelerate and decarbonize the whole economy, we still will be burning fossil fuels on our way to our transition. So it's inevitable that with the current system we have, we'll be keeping fossil fuels off the ground and therefore burning them and heating up the atmosphere. That's why it's critical that the region adapts as soon as possible, because this will get worse. And we're not talking about the potential impact that society specifically might have, because that also depends on the infrastructure it builds, but rather the whole vulnerability and the potential impacts of the worst impacts of climate change that the region might have, because that is inevitable. That will get worse in the coming decades. It will be more frequent. And if you believe that the current heat wave is an unprecedented one, I'm very sorry, but all the climate models, even the best case scenarios, predict that this will get slightly worse or catastrophically worse. Most likely we will be a pathway in between. So expect this kind of events and then prepare yourself as a citizen, as a community member, as a citizen of the world and of the region to adapt. And the first step is to stay informed. That's critical. Now we have the power of this amazing thing called technology. When with early warning systems, you can really be much more prepared, at least when it comes to the information you have. So before going for a walk or going for holidays in a specific region, for example in Southeast Asia, please consider the temperature and the forecast. For example, in Vietnam, the threshold of a new temperature set was crossed 40 degrees. So maybe if you were going there, maybe you could have considered not going there. And if you were a citizen of that country, maybe you could have reschedule your work schedule if that was possible, of course, right? So that's the first step. Early warning systems are critical and use that information in your advantage. Also, do not hesitate, if possible, and if you have access to it, to use AC. Air conditioning systems and air cooling systems are critical. And even though you might be contributing for more CO2 related emissions, which will cause more climate change in the future, it's still critical to use them. Without it, it's very difficult to surpass such days that are tropical nights, such as the ones that are happening in Korea. So do not hesitate to use AC. It's critical and it's already considered in the pathway to decarbonize the whole economy, as otherwise the adaptation side will be very difficult to concede, as otherwise people without AC will be having a very hard time, not only today, but in the coming decades. So do not hesitate to use it. But if you can use other systems, that would be even better, such as, for example, a heat pump. And then, obviously, and this is more indirect and long term, vote with your wallet and literally when it's time for elections. With your wallet when it comes to those companies that reinvent themselves and that are purpose driven and have impact business models. Those will be critical to not only adapt in a more resilient future, but especially to mitigate climate change. And both are critical. And if you can, vote with them when you buy any product, such as from a meal that you might have to the company that serves and commercializes the electricity in your home. And you can consider that by private certifications or your own conditions, but private certifications such as B Corp, for example, is a good driver in determining if a company is purpose driven or not. And then when it's time for elections, remember that this will be happening, and this is very tricky, extremely tricky, because most likely by the time you go to vote, you might not remember that crazy and unprecedented heat wave that you lived for a couple weeks, because climate change is a very tricky problem. You don't see the long-term impacts, you don't see the short-term ones. It's very intangible, and your brain might not even remember, unless it was completely catastrophic, that unprecedented extreme weather event that was not completely catastrophic to you, but for the region, right? So remember when the time comes to vote a political party that supports climate change related measures, and not only for mitigation, but also adaptation. Lastly, as with a note of optimism, humanity might be facing one of the most complex challenges, which is climate change. But we also have the tools in our survival mode and our ingenuity, which I have no doubts that we'll be able to surpass the challenge. But we need to act as soon as possible because the deadlines are very tight and nature doesn't care about us really. We're not at the center of the universe. We're one more species. And if we are not able to adapt, this does not mean the earth will stop to warm itself. No, no. The earth will become a place where we and other species will not be able to live anymore, but the earth will be there. So, really, do not do it because of some environmental idea and fiction to save the planet and so, which as well, but especially to save yourself. Saving yourself is really the main driver for saving nature, as nature will continue to exist without us, but we will not be able to continue to exist if the earth keeps warming up as it is projected to be, if we don't keep fossil fuels on the ground and we fully transition to a decarbonized economy as soon as possible. And with that, I really hope that wherever you live, especially in Asia, you adapt yourself and try to do your best as possible to reduce and be part of this problem, of the solution for this problem, because it's possible to be the change you want to see in the world, especially in your community and in your area of influence. So with that, I hope you enjoyed the video. Do not hesitate to subscribe to the channel if you like this content. And as always, embrace your curiosity, enjoy life, and again, be the change you want to see in the world. See you in the next optimistic adventure.